All right, welcome guys. So this is a on-demand recording that we wanted to share with you all regarding the Delta variant and any potential short-term impacts to meeting and events. We're here with our trusted legal partner, Barbara Dunn. I'll pass it over to her for a quick intro, and then we're going to talk about some of the impacts that she's seen so far from her clients regarding the Delta variant and how to approach those moving forward for the next few months. With that being said, I'll pass it over to Barbara to introduce herself.
Thanks, Sean. Good day, everyone. I hope you're safe and well. I'm Barbara Dunn. I'm a partner with Barnes Thornburg in our Chicago office, and I work with groups, both nonprofits as well as for-profits, in connection with their meetings, events, and trade shows.
Awesome. So, Barbara, what are you currently seeing and hearing right now from your group clients that might have an event, a conference, a trade show on the books that's going to take place like this September, excuse me? What are you seeing?
Well, what I'm seeing, Sean, are a lot of conversations. I'm having a lot of conversations with clients who fully expected, fully planned, fully funded, fully staffed to have an in-person meeting. They wanted it, their members wanted it, and they were ready to go. And they're now getting paused given the information that's coming in with regard to the variant and other factors that they might be in a reality, another situation again, similar to last year, where they can't have their event in person. Or if they have their event, it's going to need to look different and certainly plan for appropriate health and safety protocols. So I'm having a lot of those discussions, Sean, in the short term, if you will, of groups that fully expected to proceed with all the information that we had leading up to this point, and now are kind of having that reality check that either that event might not be able to proceed, or if it did proceed, it needs to look a little bit different than what they planned.
And are there main concerns around requiring proof of vaccination? Are there main concerns around maybe the hotel not feeling like they're equipped adequately to be able to host the event? What are the main concerns you're hearing from the groups regarding their upcoming meetings?
Yeah, so I think the main concerns with regard to upcoming meetings is whether, I'll say first and foremost, whether it's still safe to gather. I think that question has been put again back on the front burner because of recent events, regardless of vaccine status. So I think that's an overall consideration. I mean, I've had many clients say to me, given all this information, we don't believe it would be responsible for us to host this meeting, that it would be a good idea, that we could, all those factors that go into that. So I think that first and foremost is an issue. Now, previous to what's going on now, we had government restrictions that recognize that.
Right.
You had states with limitations on gathering sizes and all capacity, et cetera. Those have largely gone away, but obviously, new recommendations come out. And so certainly I think that's the first and foremost question for a lot of organizations is it safe for us to gather in the number that we would anticipate?
Right. And how, I would say, what is the confidence level when groups are approaching you to, let's say a group has an event coming up in September or October, what is the confidence level that you're gauging from them that they're going to be moving forward just with caution, or they're saying, okay, we need to pump the brakes entirely and they're making the call right now to cancel it and start having those conversations with the hotel?
Yeah, so I think, what I'm seeing largely are groups coming and having a bit of a sounding board discussion with me, with the business teams, which is the strategy that I would recommend. We all want that to hope, and it's the adage, hope for the best, plan for the worst.
Right.
And so that said, I think it is important for leadership to consider all options just as they have in the past. So I think the conversations are good. I will say that many groups come to us and have already made that decision to cancel, or have, alluded to the cancellation, in a few cases even announced to the stakeholders of the cancellation. So that's still, the happening. There's still some groups that make that decision ahead of it. Other groups look at, we talk through the pros and cons, and they make a business decision. We talk to leadership, they make a business decision. I think on the path of the go, no go date, we're back to that discussion, and so it looks a little bit different than it did in 2020. Thankfully, we have vaccines and other precautions. So on the go path, the issue is, okay, we want to go forward. Tell us what, or give us ideas, best practices as to what we should be doing relative to communications to our attendees, contracts with our vendors, the hotels, protocols, et cetera. And those are conversations which absolutely need to be having. And again, groups have been doing that. The hospitality community has been helping them in large part get ready for in-person meetings. And obviously lots of in-person meetings have happened. But this blip, the circumstances that find us in this last several weeks have also caused groups and hotels to take pause and wonder, is that enough?
Sure. And I'm glad you actually mentioned that as well. Just for context for everyone who may be watching, we're specifically talking about groups that have events, conferences, trade shows within the next few months. The majority of which, I believe, Barbara, am I correct, September, early October timeframe. And then I know you're also having some conversations right now with groups who might have events scheduled in the later half of this year, or the last quarter of this year, I should say.
Right. So you're absolutely right. The groups that I'm speaking with, have spoken with in the last couple of weeks and will are groups that are having events in a couple cases late August, but for the most part, September events, maybe early October. And they're in that go, no go decision discussion and kind of helping them frame that. For the groups that are having meetings later in October, November, December, into even January and February of 22, the discussion there is similar to the discussions we've had, again, plotting sort of the go, no go date, but also taking into consideration different things they should be looking at. For example, many of those organizations may be opening registration soon. Right. So looking at what they should put in their registration terms and conditions. What should we say, for example, about health and safety protocols? My recommendation to clients has been stay in the middle lane. Don't make any big extremes on either side. If it is to be that the protocols are stringent, then put them out there as such, and you can always pull them back. People understand that these things are updated, hourly. So it's something to be prepared for. But some of that is driven by opening registration, exhibitors, contracts, things like that, selling sponsorships at events. Again, some of those we need to talk about whether we could have meetings later this year, early next year, because we need to have the so-called bob and weave maneuver ready to go in our contracts and our registration terms and conditions, refund policies, you name it. Those are all things that the groups that are thinking ahead. And I think that's important. And many groups have gone through that process, unfortunately, from last year. Right. And it looks a little bit different this year in that way, but it's still the same considerations. And it's certainly something that I would encourage groups to take a look at.
And what would you, because I got to imagine thinking from the planner's perspective, for the planners that don't necessarily have a meeting or an event in this short time frame, they could be thinking, how are the hotels reacting or responding to any of these conversations that they might be having with groups that do have an event coming up in September or so around the Delta variant?
So I think the hotels, the other hospitality, community vendors have done a good job all along. As I mentioned, I think, instituting health and safety protocols, which I trust will remain, thereafter the pandemic. And so they're very receptive and responsive to groups asking questions on all manner of those. I will say that the appetite, if you will, of how much the hotels will do relative to groups' requests for face coverings or other things, it does vary significantly. And there are hotels that want to pass along costs for some of those additional measures. So there are those types of discussions that need to be had. I think overall, there's a willingness to be there. The other side of the equation we need to talk about is what's going to happen can the hotel or convention center, can they fulfill their obligations under the contract? This gets us into the staffing issue, the labor shortages. in the hospitality community. So, groups planning to have an event at a 5-star resort that has lots of restaurants and amenities and things like that, and understanding those still might be closed, not because of COVID directly restrictions, but because of lack of staffing. Right. So that continues to be a challenge in the industry too. So on those on the go path, having the conversations with the hotels is important. And in some cases, even putting together written amendments to the contract that might speak specifically to some of those staffing issues, some of the guarantees the hotel might provide with regard to facilities being open and operational, and what staff wearing face coverings or whatever the case may be. Putting those in writing after the conversation is a good strategy, because again, you want to make sure that, if you're going forward, when you're on site, you're going to have get the car, if you will, that you thought you bought. And that becomes important as well.
Excellent. And also for everyone listening too, Barbara and I did want to make sure we emphasize, we were having a recent conversation where this came up. We both definitely believe that our industry is in a much better position, of course, than where we were when, COVID first came back in March of 2020. So this is definitely not trying to scare anyone. We're just trying to make sure that we're providing value-added information because it's a timely manner to discuss. So I guess the last thing I want to ask you, Barbara, is just to kind of wrap up our conversation. What are the main points that you want to make sure groups kind of take away from this conversation?
I think what I'd ask groups to take away from this conversation is really, despite the fact that that's probably the last thing that you want to do after going through everything within the last year and a half, pull out your contracts, take a look at what they say. Even if you or your leadership feel very confident you're going to have your meeting, do yourselves all a favor and plan it out. Go back to talking about go, no go dates. Go back to talking about the business issues. Go back to talking about the risk issues. And if you have the benefit of time, meetings are down the pike a bit, that's the perfect opportunity to start engaging stakeholders and really get a good formulated information so you can make an educated decision formed. Again, I think your legal eagles are always an important component on your team, but certainly your business teams and your stakeholder communities. So those having focus groups, advisory groups, et cetera, those are all really good sounding boards for having those conversations. And that's my advice, is I don't think you can, we can't say now we can put that away. Now we don't have to worry about the meeting going forward. You do. And I think it's a good strategy to look at that and really look at all the implications, because that also helps to map the steps that need to happen. Often is the case that we would have loved to have a step done or two before we got to that point, but it hasn't presented itself that way. This gives us and meeting professional community the opportunity to do so. And as well, for the hospitality folks listening in, their efforts, which have been terrific in outreach to groups, in being prepared to respond to groups' questions with regard to on-site facilities, services, et cetera, has been good. And being proactive for them has been doing outreach months ahead. Hey, how are things going with the event? Here's what's going on here. I think all of that continues to be incredibly important and best practices on both sides.
Awesome. Well, as always, Barbara, we appreciate your expert input, and I know the planner community as well as the hotelier community does as well. So thank you again for sharing your knowledge. And to the rest of the community, well, we've gotten through 2020. We're going to get through this blip as well. And we appreciate everyone's support. Take care, guys.
Thank you.
Awesome.